Hey, buddy. So at the end of today's podcast, I've got something that I'd like to share with you. So when it's over, it's not really over. Keep listening, please. Okay, here we go. Hi, friends. Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It. My name is Mathew Blades. I'm so happy you're here. Today's episode is about the big D. And if you could just get your mind out of the gutter for a second, I'm talking about divorce. You know, half of all marriages end in divorce these days, and I have this cardinal rule, if you will, that I've been living by for most of my life. And the rule is this: when two people aren't making good karma together any longer, in my opinion, it's time to consider the possibility that the relationship has run its course. And this applies to just about anything in the world, right? If you're in a working relationship and, what's going on there just isn't making anybody feel good, we should take a look at that relationship. Maybe it's time to dissolve it. The same thing with friendships, the same thing with marriages. So Tania's going to get real vulnerable today. And in fact, here's a quick clip of the moment she lets her guard down.
I even wrote in my journal about this the other day, when I'm gonna cry. But when you get faced with divorce and you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna be alone again. And now I have my kids. I have this ridiculously large Jewish family. It's not like I'm alone. And I re-script myself every time I go into that dark place. And I'm like, okay, Tania, what is this thought that keeps coming up for you that's creating this feeling of loneliness? Because to be honest, you're not alone.
This conversation today isn't just for people considering divorce, going through divorce, or having been divorced. Her 5-step process that she's going to walk all of us through in the second half of this podcast could reframe just about anybody for anything. So please sit back and enjoy the conversation with me, Dr. Frank Bevacqua, and Tania, the host of the podcast, Better Than Bitter, here on Learn From People Who Lived It.
Find Learn From People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.
Welcome to another episode of Learn From People Who Lived It.
Hi, I'm Tania, and I live in Boston, Massachusetts.
Hey, Boston, what's up? All right, Tania, what story are you here to share today?
So today I'm here to tell a story about amicable divorce resolutions. And I know that most people, when they think of divorce, aren't thinking amicable, but I have a really great story to tell, and how I got to that resolution, and the fact that, life throws you all sorts of curveballs. And I have really been able to look at my life through a different lens. That has brought me to this place where I was able, through my own divorce, be able to have an amicable relationship with my ex, and it has benefited my kids. But yeah, it hasn't been an easy journey to get there. So that's my story to tell today.
Okay, so who do we hope hears this? If we set an intention, we're like, man, I hope this group of people hears us today. Who are they?
Anybody who's contemplating, or maybe has made the decision to divorce, or maybe they're in the midst of a divorce, or even post-divorce, but just do not believe that having an amicable relationship with their soon-to-be ex or ex is possible.
Wow. Okay, good. Welcome to another episode of Learn From People Who Lived It. We're new in the year still. We're still kind of fresh in the year. And Dr. Frank Bevacqua is back for his first episode of 2025. So welcome back to you, sir. How are you?
Good to be back. Good. I feel like it's been way too long since I've seen you and since we've done this.
I know. Well, yeah, the holidays come and then you just had a baby. And I mean, not just, but the baby's about what, a year old now?
Yeah, and now she's crawling around and trying to walk, and yeah, who has time to do anything except make sure she doesn't, hurt herself.
I love it. Well, Frank's sitting in today, as you guys know here on Learn From People Who Lived It. This podcast does have this little backdrop of therapy, this little backdrop of, how can we help you navigate these situations? And I think there's going to be some things that come up today, Frank, where we're going to lean on you. And in full transparency, Tania already told me that she's going to go all in today so that you can dissect and work through everything. So you get ready for some excellent questions.
So we're not easing back into things. This is 2 feet forward. Got it. Okay.
Yes.
I'm ready.
What I love about what's getting ready to happen today is you all know this. You come to this podcast because I am the biggest fan of what I call the transitional character. The transitional character is that person who is sent here to end dysfunction and make life better for themselves and other people. And we're going to lean into that heavily this year in 2025. Who better to do that than somebody like you, Tania? Because to me, everything you do embodies what I just said. Divorce as a whole, as a rule, has a bad taste in most people's mouths. So it's not something that anybody's like going really looking forward to it. It's a difficult thing, right? And it's difficult on a lot of levels. And I know we're going to jump into that today, but the way that you approach it with this idea that we can be amicable is really interesting to me. And I want to start the conversation by saying, I think most of us, the first time that we started to hear about divorce being amicable was, if I'm not mistaken, Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin, and they came to the table and they said, we're going to consciously uncouple. And then it turned into a joke, and then it turned into a tagline, right? But to me, that was the first time where I think as a whole, people were talking about this central idea of, we're going to get a divorce, but it doesn't mean that our world is going to come crashing down on us and everybody around us. And so I'd love for you to sort of tee us up and talk to us about the state of divorce as it stands right now, some of the things that you're, working through and seeing on the daily. So jump in where you want there, Tania. What is the state of divorce right now in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, historically, 50% of people who get married get divorced. And 60% of second marriages end in divorce. And I think the third marriages, I think it's up to 72%. Okay. So, going into every marriage thinking like, ooh, this is so warm and fuzzy and, till death do us part. To be honest, that entire commitment till death do us part has been the demise of individuals who are able to divorce amicably, because they go into this idea that if you are going to get divorced, that it's a failure. And that feeling of being a failure is what dictates how we approach our divorce, or how those feelings of feeling like a failure affect the way we act, react, and behave as we move into the process, right? So especially, with men that I coach, I find that they specifically have a much deeper feeling of failure. So if something happens in their marriage and they weren't able to perform in the way that they had set themselves up to, this overwhelming feeling of failure comes over them, and they just can't seem to move their lives forward in a more amicable way. Now, it doesn't mean that women don't feel the same thing. I think a lot of people that I coach that are women also have this overwhelming sense of failure. But being able to flip that script and say, why does divorce have to feel like a sense of failure? Why do we create this scenario by which, if we don't make it till death do us part, that means everything was bad? The way that I was able to rescript is about, well, what if divorce is just another life transition? And that we deserve to all have better, brighter futures. And that if you look at divorce as being able to say, this is a time for personal growth, this is a time for self-discovery, something might have been lost in the years that I spent with this individual, that guess what? I get to get back. I get to reclaim. And even if you don't want the divorce, even if it's something that, and I be honest, like that wasn't something that I was counting on. Like divorce happened in a time for me that like, I didn't expect it, but I just decided to say, I can either be woe is me and screw him, excuse my language, I'm going to stick it to him in the court of law, I'm going to make him hurt like I'm hurting. Or I can say, okay, this is just a new chapter. And I think of it like those books when we were younger. And you remember you were like reading those books and it's like, oh, you can turn to page 26 if you want this ending, or you can turn to page 16 if you want to go this ending. Well, that is our life. Our life is full of detours. And my life has been full of detours. My mom got sick when I was 15. I could step back before that. My dad and my mom got divorced when I was 7. I lived in Connecticut. My dad moved to Colorado, all the way across the country. My mom got cancer. I was an only child at 15 years old. And I was left, with my mother and a boyfriend that I did not have a good relationship with. And it was like the three of us trying to function. And my mother did live for 20 years, but at a much reduced capacity. So I had that caretaking, responsibility for the most part. I mean, she was pretty adamant about not having me take care of her. And she continued to find other men in her life that would take care of her. She was cute, even though she was compromised to me. It wasn't as visible to others. And I had the ability to take care of myself. I didn't really have parents taking care of me, Dr. Frank. I was very self-sufficient.
I really want to pause here and start to unpack a little bit of that with you, Dr. Frank, right? To me, when I'm talking about the idea of the transitional character, I think what happens for most people is they have to get to that crossroads in life where they decide this doesn't work anymore. What's happening in my life doesn't make sense anymore. And I know I have to do something to fix it. I know I have to do something to change it. And it's interesting to me, Tania, that at a young age, so 7 o'clock, your parents get a divorce, dad moves away, mom stays here. A few years later, mom's got cancer and you have all this other responsibility that's put on you. Doesn't it make sense to you, Dr. Frank, that in those moments, that would be birthed in her? That idea of man, if I ever go through a divorce, it's going to look so different. I mean, you may not even have ever made that connection before, Tania, but to me, that seems like how that seed was planted. Thoughts on that, Frank?
I mean, you and I have done a lot of these podcasts. We've met a lot of different people and we hear their stories, or at least part of their stories from childhood. And we kind of see how those two things link in. And I think we have pointed out before that either in adulthood, we recreate those things that we saw, either purposefully or unintentionally, right? We take on some of the same bad habits, or we repeat some of the same negative patterns, or there's this very conscious effort to kind of reject some of the things that we're seeing and go in a very, very opposite direction, right? So the kid who grows up and one or both parents had some kind of addiction, right? Either that person is also going to fall into addiction, or they're going to kind of reject and never touch a substance. It's usually one of those two extremes. It's rarely kind of somewhere in the middle.
Have you thought about that, Tania? Do you think that's where that was birthed for you?
Well, so my parents, although my dad moved to Colorado, my parents actually had a very amicable relationship.
Sure.
So Dr. Frank was saying, you either do what you know and what was modeled. And that was modeled to me. That was modeled. I had this great model of two parents, and my father got remarried, and my stepmother, which I learned because I interviewed her for my podcast, she was the conduit. And I didn't actually realize how much she was to create that amicable relationship between my parents. She was the navigator. She was the individual that created reason with my parents. My mother leaned on her for facilitation between the two of us when we were having mother-daughter spats. And my father leaned on her to just, create structure for this very challenging cross-country shared, it wasn't even shared custody. It was kind of like a come when you can, relationship. But I modeled that. But I think the part of that I really struggle with, and I still struggle with, is this feeling of just being alone in my world, because I was an only child and I was going through these things alone, and I was required to be strong. I was required to be self-sufficient. I was required to I've got this because no one's got me. And I think that I even wrote in my journal about this the other day, like when I'm going to cry. But when you get faced with divorce and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to be alone again. And now I have my kids. I have this ridiculously large Jewish family. It's not like I'm alone. And I re-script myself every time I go into that dark place. And I'm like, okay, Tania, what is this thought that keeps coming up for you that's creating this feeling of loneliness? Because to be honest, you're not alone. You're not alone in the world. But it is this idea of I am the supporter. I am the person that's taking care of everybody. My dad was never a caretaker. He was somebody that I almost felt like had childlike behaviors. He wasn't somebody who was taking responsibility and I could lean on for that kind of stuff. And then my mother got sick, right? So she wasn't there either. So I feel like when we talk about those different life transitions and the modeling, yes, I could model this amicable relationship, but yet I think that where I really get stuck is getting out of my own head about why do I have to always feel like I've got everybody else? And then look at what I'm now doing in my profession. I got everybody else, right? I've got everybody else that I'm helping in the world, which gives me really good feedback. I think it gives me that sense of that I'm doing something good, and it makes me feel good to do good. But
sure.
yet, I still feel that gap. Who's got me?
Thank you for your vulnerability. I think that's the root of, the feelings that you're talking about. And I appreciate you just kind of going there. Thoughts on what she had to say, Frank? If not, I'm going to kind of start to move around a little bit.
I just think that some of those thoughts are, Tania, at the very beginning when you were asked who do you hope hears it, I think the first thing you said was people who might be contemplating divorce, and then you listed some other similar categories. But I think there are a lot of people who are at this place where they're like, I don't know if this should continue. And there's lots of hesitation. Sometimes those hesitations are financial or logistical or religious or whatever. And then there's kind of those really personal ones of, I don't want to be alone. I don't want to have to start over. This isn't
find anybody better.
Yeah, right. This isn't perfect. This isn't my ideal, right, but it's better than nothing kind of a thing. And I think all of those things either prevent somebody from making that decision in the first place, or, can keep somebody in kind of a stuck place even after the decision is made, because you're still battling all those. Did I make the right decision? Here I am. I haven't found anyone else. I didn't find something better. And I think there are some people who on the other side of divorce, even just being on their own, the relationship was maybe so bad that just being on their own is immediately and obviously better than what it was before. But if it's not quite that, and there's not, the next relationship, then I imagine there starts to creep in some thoughts of, was this the right thing? Is this ever going to fully work out? Or, where am I in this process?
Okay. Love that. Thank you. I want to move to really, you walked me right to it, Frank, which is this idea.
You're welcome.
Thank you. People contemplating divorce. I once upon a time was in a Buddhist training. This was about 7, maybe it's closer to 9 years ago now. And in this Buddhist training, the geshe that we were listening to was talking about relationships, and somebody had asked him the question about divorce, and this geshe said something so simple, and it stuck with me, and it's always stuck with me. And I want to bat this around with you guys. Okay. And Tania, you're going to go first. What the Geshe said was, I believe that people should stay in relationship until they don't make good karma together again. And that was such a simple way to frame when it's time to contemplate the end, when it's time to contemplate that we need to move from one situation and into another situation. And if that's with somebody, I know that's easier said than done, right? But I'd love your thoughts on that idea of when is it time to start thinking about divorce? Well, if you guys have stopped making good karma together, if every time you get together, the world's a little worse off, then it's probably time to start looking at that relationship. And that's going to show itself in a lot of different ways. But bat that around a little bit, Tania, from your perspective.
So so my journey was interesting because before I was faced with divorce, I was already kind of in this place of not feeling fulfilled in my career. I had started getting coached by a life coach. And it was at that moment where I was like, oh gosh, like this is what I want to do. I want to coach people because I was working in advertising. I was just, in a vapid, industry. So when you were saying about the not giving back the karma, I believe that the challenge is that but if you're not loving yourself, what kind of karma are you able to give back to somebody, right?
Of course.
And so I believe that, at least in my case, my ex-husband was also struggling with, his own personal feeling good about himself, right? And so I wasn't there to give him validation, to make him feel good, right? When he wasn't feeling good about himself, instead of him saying, well, why am I not feeling good about myself? And I shouldn't rely on somebody else to try to make me feel good. I need to work on feeling good. So I was super busy working on making myself feel good, right? Because I knew that with working on yourself and going deep with your own self and learning how to love yourself again, figuring out how to get fulfillment on your own, you don't need to have that other person who's in a partnership with you, but you're not relying on them for your dopamine. You're not relying on them to make you feel good. So, we really were in two different places, but thinking through it, if he was working on him and working on, making him feel good, and I was working on making me feel good, would we be able to actually have better love for one another? And I think that you really can't love somebody until you love yourself, and you just can't show up properly in partnership. And I talk about relationships in 3 different concentric circles: passion, playmate, and partnership. And, if you can't find yourself in those concentric circles, or you don't have that center self that connects all 3 of those together, it really can compromise a relationship. So yeah, I totally think that, Mathew, it is the karma.
What are those circles again? It's the passion, play, and what?
I call them passion, playmate, and partnership.
Okay. I like that because I can visualize the concentric circles, and, they have to overlap, right? There's got to be you got to be able to play by yourself, and you got to be able to play with your partner. You got to have your own passions, and you got to have passions together, and you got to, that's what you're getting at, correct?
Correct. Passion, intimacy, that's your other concentric circle. But passion and intimacy, yes, you need to have that with yourself too. You need to be able to go there with yourself and connect with your own self in order for you to connect, intimately with somebody else. And so
every time somebody uses the word intimate on my podcast, I feel implored to let you know that you need to go back into the catalog of Learn from People Who Lived It. And we did a 4-part series with Dr. Elizabeth Frederick around intimacy. And it was one of the most eye-opening episodes that I've ever had the pleasure of hosting in my entire life. Because just like there's 5 love languages, I learned that there's 5 different types of intimacy. And when I learned about my intimate language, if you will, it changed the game for me. And so I encourage everybody to go back and listen to that podcast series that I did with Elizabeth Frederick, because it was just incredible. Frank, can I get your thoughts on that karmic viewpoint of ending a relationship? And then we can kind of move on, because one of the things that I want Tania to help us do today, right? Like we always say, you can't just come in here and stir up the nest. You got to close us up a little bit. You got to give us something that we can work with. And she actually does. She's got, kind of her game plan to help people get through a divorce amicably. And so I want to touch on the high points of that toward the end of this interview. But Frank, bat that around first, man. Ending the relationship when the karma's just not there anymore.
I think the biggest thing that I can add and just kind of summarize, like there has to be a belief in an individual that they deserve better than what's happening, right? Because if we're talking about karma, if we're talking about what you put out into the world is what you get back in one way or another. And if you're not getting good stuff back, but you don't believe that you deserve better stuff than what you're getting back, like nothing's going to change. So I think that's really kind of the crux of all of it.
Okay. Tania, I want to move into this next space, and Frank, you're going to come in on this too. In every difficult thing that we face in life, there are these completely useless thoughts and emotions. As you think about that, and you sort of touched on it just a second ago with, you regarding your thought patterns and how you kind of have to talk to yourself and get yourself out of those thought patterns. But could you speak to that a little bit, Tania? As for somebody that's going through divorce right now or contemplating a divorce right now, what are those useless emotions? Like, what should they're going to feel it, but like, bro, just calm down. You let that part go. It's not going to help you.
Yeah. So I have something that I teach in my 5-step game plan course. It's the second step is the mindset mastery. And part of that is understanding that it is not your life circumstances that are making you feel. It is how you are thinking about the life circumstance that is making you feel. And the fact is that your thoughts are just the stories and beliefs that you're telling yourself, right? And so every time you have a thought and that thought is producing an emotion like the one I just was talking about, loneliness, right? So what do? I'm like, okay, well, what's the thought? What's the thought? The thought is, okay, well, my parents never supported me. Or the thought is, I'm now just without a spouse and that I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life or whatever. So those thoughts, which are just like that thought, like I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life. Like that's just a thought. It's the story I'm telling myself. And again, I'm not alone, right? So I go back and I re-script it because that feeling of loneliness is coming from my feeling, not from the fact that I'm getting divorced. I'm not getting divorced is not causing me a feeling of loneliness. It's how I'm thinking about it. So there are all of these different emotions, but emotions, and Tara Brach, who's one of like my favorite mindfulness coaches, she talks about the fact that all of our emotions come from a core of fear. So it's about looking at what am I scared of? What am I fearful of? What am I avoiding? Because it is about learning how to move through that fear. What she says, it's, all these waves are crashing down on you, but it's so important for you to be able to learn how to ride those waves and move through that fear. Because if you can move through that fear, then those emotions are going to shift, right? And it's about re-scripting what is causing you to have those fears. Especially in divorce, a lot of people really struggle with, like, if they haven't worked, what is my livelihood? I'm going to be living in a car. I'm not going to be able to support myself. Those are all just thoughts. They're not facts. Right. But it stems from a fear of like the fact that they're going to be destitute, or the emotion of just complete hopelessness or lack of self-worth or whatever, because they don't believe that they have a skill that they can go out there and get a job with. So what are the worthless emotions? Well, none of our emotions are worthless, right? But they all stem from our thoughts. And so it's about doing those thought downloads every day and reviewing them and saying, how is that thought serving me today? Is there like a different thought that I could be having that might produce a different emotion? Because again, those are just stories I'm telling myself. And people, especially in divorce, get so fixated on the unknowns, and they create these stories because they're making up, well, this is definitely going to happen and they're going to respond like this, and oh, he's never going to do that, or she, oh, so they're making up all these stories, causing so much anxiety, right? Take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Try to focus on what you know. And it's always about like the truth and your truth. Is it a truth, or is it something that I'm making my truth? Because that, if it's my truth, it's just a thought. If it's the truth, that's the fact, right?
Yeah.
So again, like we deal at Better Than Bitter. I train people to do this self-coaching every single day, because it is what creates a contentious divorce. It is what creates the battleground courtroom, environment. It's what creates the burden of resentment and anger that carries on through your life, because you haven't reached a place of forgiveness to allow for yourself that freedom to move forward in your life.
Well, I think, there's a perfect opportunity to let people know that, your website's up. This is you right here. If people want to work with you and they want more of what you're putting down, this is a great place to go and jump on that. Frank, I want to come to you now with that same question. And you and I have had this conversation several times around, grief, which I think falls in the category of divorce, right? You have to grieve that the relationship isn't the one that you thought it was going to be. And we talk a lot about maybe feeling guilty or that shame that can kind of fall over people. And, to me, those have, over my lifespan, been fairly useless emotions. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes feeling a little guilty about something gives you back that moral compass. You're like, well, should I be feeling guilty about that? And it can guide you back to where you want to go. But Frank, your thoughts on, what she just said, which, by the way, I just have to articulate, was brilliant. I love this. Your thoughts are not facts. That's such a cool mantra. Your thoughts are not facts. So go ahead, Frank.
So multiple things. One, totally agree. Thoughts are not facts. Couple of problems there. One, most people don't believe that, right? Or like if you try to tell them that, they'll fight you on it.
Yeah, right.
Even harder though is when they don't realize that intermediate step exists between the thing that happens out in the world and the emotional reaction that they have, right? And you'll hear people say things like, well, wouldn't you be mad if blah, blah, blah? And you might find some people to agree with you. You might find some people who would also be mad if. And then you might also find some people, if you ask enough people, where that situation would not make them mad, right? And so there is this intermediate step, and it happens really, really quickly, which is why I think most people don't recognize that it's in there. But there's this intermediate step where you think something about what has happened, which now leads to that emotional reaction. In terms of whether the emotion is useful or not, I think there's two directions, right? So the emotion is useful because, again, that thought happens like a split second and we feel that emotion. And so the emotion is the information that we're more aware of. That can lead us to help to figure out what the thought probably was, because we have to identify a thought that matches that. So it can be useful working backwards and figuring out like, okay, what was I thinking about it? It's not necessarily useful in helping you move forward, solving the problem, figuring out how to respond, right? So it can be informative, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good catalyst to move forward to a better place. So lots of layers to your question, as always.
Thank you. We're sitting down with Dr. Frank and Tania. Better Than Bitter is your podcast that you have, and I'm sure you spend a lot of time talking about these types of things. But you mentioned step 2 in your 5-step process is the mindset. So can we start to unpack that a little bit as we wind down our conversations? What's step 1 in the process of an amicable divorce?
So step 1 is meeting yourself where you are. You talked about grief. So we talk very deeply about grief and understanding that divorce, just like death and dying, is a loss. And that's really important that you allow for yourself to grieve properly, whether you're the one who initiated the divorce or the other individual. You're both going to still go through a grieving process, and it is not a linear process. So, the shock, the disbelief, the anger, the resentment, the bargaining, depression, sadness, they're going to come and go, and they will continue to come and go. It's not like you can fully process your grief before you step into your legal divorce, but do give yourself space, because the issue with most people who all of a sudden are faced with divorce or decide to divorce, they immediately go hire a lawyer. And they haven't given themselves the space that they need to grieve properly so they can move into their divorce in a lower emotional state. So that's really step 1. And we do a lot with authentic you, meaning redefining who you are authentically, understanding who you were before your marriage, who you became during your marriage, and then redesigning who you want to be and really trying to find some space for yourself to explore. Okay, like this is like I'm not me anymore. And I have this amazing opportunity to be a different me. And so getting people having that hope as they move into step 2.
Brilliant. I love everything that she just said. Anything you want to add on to that, Frank? If not, we can move into step 3.
No, keep going.
Yeah, it's such good stuff because, and what I heard you say there, Tania, was, I love this idea. So I went to my retreat 3 years ago, and the whole damn world changed for me. And there was a lot of mantras, and I mean, I'm not gonna be able to find them right now, or maybe I will, but still to this day, I have the 2 pages of notes that I took over 4 days of mantras of things I needed to remember, and I just keep them at my desk. And one of the things that I wrote down was get back to knowing because you do. And it's around that idea that, when we how do I want to phrase this? When we get into pain, when we start hurting, when things are happening around us that don't feel very good, if we're not really feeling good about ourselves, we're going to react a certain way, and you heard this before, like you act like you don't know better. And
Yeah.
we know better. We kind of know what to do, but we get lost in the hustle. We get lost in the shuffle of the whole thing. And so I love that you take people, and step 1 is like, whoa, before we even do anything else, who the hell are you?
Yeah.
Because that's the person we need to take through this journey. And so it's brilliant. So you help them discover who they are. You meet them where they are. You help them with their mindset. And then, so what's step 3 in your process?
Step 3 is self-care, self-love.
Of course.
We do self-love, self-care, self-compassion. We spend a lot of time on self-compassion. What people don't realize is they're beating themselves up. They're speaking to themselves not like they would speak to a friend. And they continue to have this inner dialogue on how bad they are or what they weren't, or, a feeling of failure and all these things. Meanwhile, like if a friend was going through the same experience, they wouldn't be like, dude, you know what, Mathew, you're such a failure. You know what? You're worth nothing. Nobody would talk to you like that if they're a friend. So we do a lot of work there on step 3.
Love that. Frank, I'm going to ask you to do me a solid here.
Yeah.
When I speak to people, I'm really clear about this. You will not practice any self-care or self-love, meaning you will continue to just do the status quo, or even worse, self-sabotage yourself until you feel like you matter enough to do those things. And there's really no better way to articulate that than, Frank, I'm going to ask you to put our audience through your top 5 exercise. The one exercise that you did with me on the very first meeting that you and I ever had together at Pita Jungle on Ray Road in Ahwatukee 6 or 7 years ago, maybe longer. Do that exercise for everybody right now so that folks can understand how this works.
Should we have Tania do it? And
Great.
Sure.
Sure.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I don't know if you have something to write it down. You probably don't have to write it down. You can
Open
probably
up
put it in
notes on
head.
your phone.
Open up
and-
notes
yeah,
on your
right.
phone.
Oh.
But really simply, I want you to think for a second and identify the top 3 most important people in your life right now.
Okay.
She is
She's
typing really
away.
quickly.
Love that.
She got to it right away.
Yeah.
So we'll give you another second, and obviously anybody who's listening, give them a second too. Done already?
I'm done.
Okay, cool. We're gonna extend that. You can now do a top 5. So if there's like a 4 and 5, you want to add those folks in, go ahead and do that, and that'll round out our full top 5.
Okay.
And I always tell people, if you can't come up with 2 more humans that you like, you can put down your dog. It's totally fine. Some people like their dogs more than their humans.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All
Okay,
right, so
you
now
got
we
your
list.
You got your top 5.
Yep.
Okay. Would you mind sharing your list in order?
Sure. Oh, well, can my kids be tied?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I got my 2 children,
Yeah.
my ex-husband,
Mhm.
my father, and my stepmom, who was my dad's second wife. He's on number 4.
Okay. And you had a tie for number 1, so that's your
That's
5
fine.
people,
So I
right?
can't put one kid in front of the other.
That's it. That's it.
I mean, wink, wink. Yeah, of course. We love them all equally.
On any given day, 1 or 2 changes, but they're staying
Yes.
at 1 and 2.
Yes.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
So now, here is the question for you and for anybody else listening and following along. Where is yourself on that list?
Oh, I didn't put myself on the list.
I didn't either, Tanya. I didn't even consider that I could be on the list of the top 5 most important people in my world. Like, the thought didn't even cross my mind.
Me neither. Yeah.
And that's the problem, is that we don't see ourselves as important enough to take care of ourselves. And so I love this exercise. Thank you, Frank. I love that exercise because it should open up it should be the holy shit moment for some people. They're like, whoa, what? Because the question I want to ask you is, how different would your life look if you were one of the 5 most important people? Would you skip the nap? Would you keep eating the thing? Would you engage in that relationship that you knew wasn't healthy for you? Would you say yes to this project that you knew was going to burn you out? It changes the way that you take care of yourself. And so I love that for you, Tanya, that's step 3 in your process, because it's brilliant. You have to start pouring into yourself. And I think you see this. A lot of people who are going through divorce, they're at what my guru would call a self-love deficit, meaning they've almost stopped taking care of themselves because they're trying to manage all of the pieces around them. I don't know. Do you relate with that?
Yeah, I do. I actually have come off of a relationship with a man who wasn't through his divorce, and he lost himself in that. He stopped taking. He couldn't function anymore between taking care of his kids, taking care of his work, adding me into the picture, which it just no room. And he just literally stopped taking care of himself. And then he started feeling so badly about himself that he shut down. Right. So I think that that's part of it. It's part of part of the process is prioritizing yourself. I think that I was lucky in the sense that I started taking care of myself before the divorce happened. I started doing the coaching. I made the decision to become a life coach before I was faced with divorce. And it saved me. It saved me because I had all these tools in my toolbox that were so fresh, and I had been doing so much work, and it saved me. And all I can tell, and that's the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I was like, oh my gosh, like my process saved me. And I want other people to go through the process I went through so I can help more people save themselves. Amen. I'm not going to save anybody, but I want them to save themselves, right? So just giving them the tools in their toolbox.
It's so great. What an incredible process. And Frank, I think you have to agree, right? With anybody you've ever worked with in your professional career, meeting them where they are, helping them understand who they are, working on their mindset, making sure they start taking care of themselves. Like, what a perfect foundation to set up what are now coming up with 4 and 5, right, Frank?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So number 4 is what? After I take care of myself, a little self-care, a little self-love, what am I doing?
Manifesting your desired outcome.
All right.
It is so important for people to get clarity on what they want in their lives. I'm not talking about, do I get the house or the car, or I get, I'm talking about, what do I want from a drone's view for my life? How do I want to feel in my life moving forward? How do I want to develop relationships? How do I want to create a life for myself by which I have a goal in mind? Because when we talk about the mindset management, we just stopped talking when we talked about getting to the feelings that were caused from our thoughts that were generated by our facts. But the next step of that is our actions, reactions, behaviors, or inactions that are being driven by our emotions. And it's those actions, reactions, and behaviors that are driving results in our life. So by manifesting your desired outcome, defining it, getting clarity around it, I can work backward from there. If I know what I want, am I acting, reacting, and behaving in a way that's going to generate that result? And if I'm not, that means I'm not feeling the way I should feel. And if I'm not feeling the way I should feel to be able to act and react that way, that means that I'm not thinking about my situation properly. So it just allows for that mindset management, step 2, to move into step 4 and getting clarity around that, to really utilize that thought framework tool that I'm talking about.
Oh my gosh, this is so fantastic. So you are now in step 4, you are taking the embodiment of the transitional characters. And now you're, I would say to people, if you want to change your life, you have to change your life. Like, you can't keep doing the same things all the time. And so part of that process, I think, is stepping into a new version of you, or stepping into newness. My guru talked about how snakes shed their skin and they get ready for the new season. And we need to be doing the same thing. So a lot of us need to shed the old us, and we need to have this vision of where we want to go next. And I wanted to give kind of this concrete example of what you just said in there, which is, you mentioned how I figure out who I want to be and then I work backwards. And so one of the things could be like, what, for me, because again, it's step 1, you help me figure out who I am. You said, what, I am a peaceful person, and I don't choose to yell and scream and get angry. And that doesn't feel good for me. And that's not how I want to live my life. And then, so the way that you work backwards from that is then when those moments show up and you maybe see the ferocious dragon showing up, you have a second to just pause, because you worked on your mindset, right? Pause. Is this the person I want to be? Is this the moment I need to be the dragon? Because there's some moments where you need to be the dragon. Let's be clear about that. But that's what I think you're talking about. Is you have to figure out what kind of a person you want to be, and then you can work backwards. And I'd love for either one of you to sort of bat that around a little bit.
Yeah, it's not just like who you want to be, because that's one element of it, but it's how you want your life to feel and how you want to show up in the world for yourself. Like you said, who you want to be, but it's also the environment you want to create. Like when I think about my clarity around my outcome, I think about my children. I think about, in my life, what do I want this bigger vision? I want my kids to be able to have relationships that are open and honest, communicative. And I want them to not feel fear around vulnerability. I want them to, if they get divorced, for them to recognize that that's okay too, and that they're going to be okay, and they're going to be able to have an amicable divorce and a relationship. And when they go to have children, that I want my ex-husband to be able to be there to experience that with me, and that we're going to always be this re-envisioned family. And if he's with somebody and I'm with somebody, we can just be a bigger, one big happy family. My stepmom said something so beautiful, and you're going to love this. She said that it is the family of affection. When she started talking, because she's not married to my dad anymore, right? But I still call her my stepmom or my bonus mom. But like, we've created a family of affection. And that is my manifested outcome. I want to create a family of affection in my life. And that goes back to my original thought of like this idea of being alone. I'm never going to be alone if I have a family of affection. And that can incorporate friends. It can incorporate whomever, right? It's just such a beautiful thought. So.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Frank, anything you want to add? If not, we're going to step 5.
I do, but I need both of you to promise me that there will be no judgment with what I'm about to say.
Yeah, you have my word.
Tanya's not giving
Tanya's
me
not-
her word.
Tanya's not
Tanya's
biting.
holding back.
No judgment, no judgment.
She's like a Mike Judge, depending on what comes out of your mouth.
Okay.
I am one of, apparently, I'm guessing, very few people who have never seen Lost, the TV show.
Got it.
Okay.
So if you have seen it, no spoilers, because my wife has just made me start watching it. We're literally a couple episodes in of season 1. So that was the part that you can't judge me on. I haven't seen it. But we were on, I don't know, like episode 4 or something last night. And there was a line in there. I think it was Locke said to Jack, "You can't lead until you know where you're going." And so as we're talking about, you can't figure out how to put one foot in front of the other to get where, like, you have to know what the outcome is, where you're trying to get to, because how can you possibly lead yourself or lead others unless you know what that is? So I can now officially go tell my wife there was a professional benefit to her making me watch Lost. And now I feel like I can like write off my Netflix subscription somehow. Yeah, I'm going to figure out how to make that work.
All
But
right.
Love that.
Step 5, Tanya. Step 5 is what?
So step 5 is just getting prepped, because
Yeah.
again, every single person I coach comes to me and was like, "Can you give me interview questions for a lawyer?" Or who are the team of professionals? And I just try my best to give them the halt on that, to have them press that pause button, because now we've gone through step 1 through 4. They've gotten the courage. They've gotten their mojo back. They believe that there is a brighter future. They know how to manage their mindset. They've communicated or learned how to communicate more effectively. I have an amazing free webinar on my website called How to Communicate to Get What You Want in Divorce. And I break it down into 6 different steps. And so it's really, really important that individuals know that, yes, I'm going to get you there, right? I'm going to get you to the point where you can gather what you need and hire the professionals, find out who your right support system, and I will give you the interview questions. I will help and guide you and review all the answers. I'll get you there. I'll tell you what you need to gather before you enter into that legal relationship with an attorney or a mediator. I'll help you draft emails to your attorney so they don't gouge you for every 7 minutes that they spend reading or listening to you. I'll make sure you are not telling them the why story. I do talk about 3 simple shifts as to, how to start this journey, and throwing away the why you're getting divorced is number 2, because that is something very important. You need to process this emotional divorce outside of the legal environment. Otherwise, you're going to be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on legal fees. So your lawyer can sit there and listen to what you should be talking to a therapist or a coach about. So
That's solid advice. Solid advice.
So I get them there. I get them prepped. I promise.
That's so good. Frank, parting final thoughts from you as we wrap up today. I feel like, we've got some good stuff baked in today's episode.
Yeah, I'm not going to muddy the waters by attempting to summarize. I think Tanya should summarize it's her program. So what are the takeaways that we need to know? If we remember one thing from this, you tell us. What do we need to know?
Press the pause button. Contemplating, decided to get divorced, midway through divorce, try to press the pause button, take a step back, do the work on yourself, get yourself ready with courage and the hope that a brighter future is possible and that an amicable resolution is possible. And I always say to people, I am not telling you that the legal process is going to be warm and fuzzy. I'm just not. It is a really tumultuous, difficult business negotiation, the hardest business negotiation you will ever endure. But what I do tell you is when you get through it, you do have an opportunity to have an amicable resolution. It just takes cooperation, collaboration, and compromise, and you will get there. So yeah, 5 steps.
All right. I like it a lot. Like I said, she has on her website, you can connect to all of her products, including the podcast, which I made a little appearance on. I was like the first non-divorced person to be on the podcast, I think.
Yes, I did actually have another one today.
Oh, you did?
Divorced person. Yes.
Good. It's a great podcast, and I absolutely love the work that you're doing, Tania, with this whole thing. I mean, to me, you are the transitional character. You're here to end dysfunction. And I mean, that like, to me, that's everything you're about. It's like, can we hit the pause button and stop all this madness, please? And just work through this the right way. And that just feels right to me. More than I like it, it feels right to me. So I really appreciate that. And Dr. Frank, you're always just perfect. And thank you very much for being on this episode with us. I mean it, man. You just add
sweet talker like always.
Yeah, you just add so much value to my life, and you add so much value to this podcast, and I'm really grateful for you.
Well, thank you. I kind of like you too.
Oh. Tania, we'll send everybody your way in the show notes. You'll have all the links that you need to get to you. Thank you for being on today's show.
Thank you so much, Mathew. It was such a pleasure.
Good times.
Nice to meet you, Dr. Frank.
You too.
We have 3 goals with Learn from People Who Lived It. 1, to help you feel less alone. 2, encourage you to seek out a coach, a therapist, a church, anyone who can help you get through your journey and find some healing. 3, when you're ready, share your story with us.
Find Learn from People Who Lived It, wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.
Hey guys, so I don't always jump on at the end of the podcast, but today I wanted to come on because there were so many things in this podcast today that just really, really made me think. When I'm out speaking, I'm talking about that fact that we need to break the cycle. And we need to break the cycle and end dysfunction because it's killing people. It really is. Like, just look out in the world, man, and you can see how many people aren't smiling anymore, how many people walk around with their head down, how many people are really suffering terrible emotional damage. Suicide rates are at an all-time high, depression, anxiety, everybody's talking about it, and it's time to fucking address it. It's time to stop pretending like it's not happening and like go right through it. And this is what I coach people to do, right? Go right through it. All too often, many of us have tried to walk it around, man. Like you go over, you go under, you can't. You got to go right through the thing. And the deal is this. Most of us are running an outdated operating system. Let's just think about it like that. Based on the things that we've learned and accumulated and experienced throughout the years of our lives, we have a certain way that we live our lives. That's super fair. But for too many of us, the programming system that's running the show is outdated, man. It's time for a serious upgrade. And I want you to think about it like this. Most of us have a cell phone, and periodically, whatever carrier you're with will offer this update. And you can say no to the update for a little while. You can push it off a little bit longer, but eventually you have to upgrade with the newest operating system. Why? Come on, you know the answer to this, right? Because it makes everything better. It makes the experience better. Sure, you can probably still email. Sure, you could probably still watch a video. Sure, you still might have some capabilities on your favorite apps, but they're going to run a lot smoother and a lot more efficient with the upgraded operating system. Friends, if you're rolling through the world, as I was, in autopilot and smile mode, I want you to just consider for a second that you could be the transitional character in your lineage, and you could be the person sent here to end the dysfunction. And if you're interested in what that looks like and how you can get those things done, reach out to our team. we'd love to get you on the podcast. We can talk about it there, or we can set up a time for me to come and speak to you and your group, and we can walk through this thing together. Nothing would make me happier. Believe that. Have a great day, guys. Thanks again for listening to the podcast. And if you're still here, please consider sharing this with somebody you know and love.